In October 1986, a federal judge in Boston ordered the Eastman Kodak Company to stop selling instant cameras immediately, without appeal. 16 million Americans who had purchased a Kodak instant camera, the EK4, the EK6, the handle, suddenly held a machine with no future. No film would ever be made for it again. Kodak had to buy those cameras back. Polaroid had won. The court found that Kodak had infringed 12 Polaroid patents. The damages would eventually total $925 million, the largest patent settlement in American photographic history, paid in full in 1991. Polaroid's engineers had built something Kodak could not legally replicate. The instant camera category belonged, by order of a federal court, to one company and one company alone. 15 years later, that company was bankrupt. The patents that outlasted Kodak's instant camera business could not outlast the digital sensor. The $925 million settlement that arrived in 1991 was spent before the decade ended. The most sophisticated consumer camera ever manufactured in the United States. The camera that folded flat, ejected its own film, developed its own print, and required no darkroom, no lab, no waiting, could not find a market in a world that no longer needed film at all. But the real story of the Polaroid SX-70 is not the bankruptcy filing or the courtroom victory. It is the story of the single most ambitious act of American industrial design in the history of photography, and what ambition of that magnitude costs. Every week we tell the stories of the American companies that built the cameras and film that recorded American life, and what the market did to them. Like the video, and subscribe if that history matters to you. This story begins not in a camera store or a corporate boardroom, but in a research laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1943, with a question a 3-year-old girl asked her father on a vacation in New Mexico. Edwin Land was not a camera designer. He was a physicist who had dropped out of Harvard twice, once to pursue an idea about polarized light that he was convinced would change the way Americans drove at night, and once because the idea had consumed everything else in his life that was not the idea itself. Land founded the Polaroid Corporation in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1937. The company's first products were not cameras. They were polarizing filters, sheets of synthetic material that could block glare at precise angles, reducing the reflected light that blinded American drivers on wet highways and the American military gunners who needed to read instrument panels in direct sunlight. The United States Army bought Polaroid's filters in quantity for goggles, rangefinders, and aerial reconnaissance equipment before the first Polaroid camera existed. By 1941, Polaroid held defense contracts that had made Land one of the most important industrial scientists in wartime America. The camera came from a different direction entirely. In the winter of 1943, Land was on vacation in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with his wife Helen and their 3-year-old daughter Jennifer. Land photographed Jennifer with a conventional roll film camera. Jennifer asked why she could not see the picture right away. Land later recalled that within the hour, he had worked out in his mind the general principles of a one-step photographic process, a camera that would develop its own film inside the camera and deliver a finished print in under a minute. He was not exaggerating. He was describing what he would build. The first commercial Polaroid camera, the Model 95, named for its 95mm focal-length lens, launched at the Jordan Marsh department store in Boston on November 26, 1948. The price was $89.75, the equivalent of approximately $1,030 in today's dollars. The Model 95 used sepia-toned roll film that produced a finished print in 60 seconds. Jordan Marsh sold every unit in stock on the first day. Polaroid could not manufacture cameras or film fast enough to meet the demand generated by a single department store demonstration. The lens on that first camera was a Wallensack, an American optical component manufactured in Rochester, New York, by the same company whose lenses equipped American 8mm and 16mm home movie cameras. The Wallensack f11 triplet lens on the Model 95 was not a precision optical instrument by any measure that a professional photographer would recognize, but it produced a recognizable image in 60 seconds, without a darkroom, without chemical trays, without an enlarger, without training. That was the product. The photograph was secondary. The miracle was the minute. Polaroid sold 900,000 cameras and $5 million worth of film in the first year of commercial production. By 1953, the company occupied a converted industrial facility on Main Street in Waltham, Massachusetts, and employed more than 2,000 people. By 1957, annual film sales exceeded camera sales for the first time, and Edwin Land understood that he had not built a camera company. He had built a consumable system. The camera was the platform. The film was the revenue. That distinction, platform versus consumable, would define everything Polaroid built for the next 40 years. It would also explain precisely and without ambiguity why the company could not survive the decade in which consumable film ceased to exist. But in 1957, that reckoning was still 44 years away. Edwin Land had a different problem. The Model 95, the Model 110, the Highlander, the Pathfinder. Every Polaroid camera built in the first 2 decades was a large, heavy accordion bellows machine that produced a peel-apart print, requiring the photographer to time the development manually, peel the negative from the positive, and coat the finished image with a chemical stabilizer applied by hand with a small roller. Land wanted something else entirely. He had wanted it since 1943. He was about to build it. Edwin Land announced the SX-70 to Polaroid shareholders in April 1972. He did not describe it in the language of product launches. He called it absolute one-step photography, a system in which the photographer would do nothing except point the camera and press the shutter. No timing, no peeling, no coating, no negative to discard. The camera would eject the print automatically. The print would develop in ambient light in the photographer's hand over the course of 60 to 90 seconds. The finished image would be permanent, stable, and dry to the touch. What Land did not say, because he did not need to, was that no camera like this had ever been built anywhere in the world. The SX-70 was a single-lens reflex camera, an SLR, meaning the photographer looked through the taking lens itself via a mirror system rather than through a separate viewfinder window. Every SLR built before the SX-70 was a large, rigid body. The mirror required space. The film transport required space. The lens required distance from the film plane. The SX-70 folded all of this into a body that collapsed to less than an inch thick and fit into a jacket pocket. When the photographer pressed a small lever on the side of the camera, the body unfolded. The lens rose. The mirror aligned. The viewfinder cleared. In a single motion, it was mechanically an object that should not have been possible. The lens itself was a 4-element glass design with an aspheric front element. Aspheric meaning the glass surface was not a simple curve, but a precisely calculated complex shape that reduced optical distortion across the entire frame. Aspheric glass elements in 1972 were hand-polished. They could not be mass-produced by any automated process then available. Polaroid manufactured them anyway, absorbing the cost into a camera that already cost more to produce than it sold for at retail. The SX-70 used a new film format Land called integral film. Integral meaning the negative, the positive, the developer chemistry, and the image receiving layer were all contained in a single flat plastic unit the size of a playing card. When the shutter fired, a small electric motor, powered by a flat battery built into the film pack itself, ejected the film unit through rubber rollers that burst open a pod of reagent chemicals sandwiched inside the unit. The image developed from the outside in, the dyes migrating through layers of chemical receivers until the final color image appeared, fully formed, on the white-bordered surface. The photographer never touched a chemical. There was no negative. There was nothing to discard. There was only the print. At retail launch in 1972, the SX-70 sold for $180. Approximately $1,080 in today's dollars. A 10-exposure film pack cost $690, or roughly $49 today per 10 photographs. The closest American competitor in the instant camera category was Polaroid's own peel-apart color pack series, which sold for $29.95 and produced a technically inferior image. No Japanese manufacturer offered an instant camera of any description. No German manufacturer had entered the category. The SX-70 had no competition because no one else had solved the engineering problems that Land's team had spent 7 years and an estimated $500 million, approximately $3.5 billion in today's dollars, solving first. The SX-70 entered American retail distribution through camera specialty dealers and selected department stores in late 1972, initially in limited quantities. Popular Photography magazine tested the production model in early 1973 and reported that the SX-70's optical resolution exceeded that of several 35mm cameras in the same price range. The The review was not a commercial endorsement. It was a technical finding that confirmed what Polaroid's engineers already knew. The SX-70 was not a novelty. It was a precision optical instrument that happened to develop its own film. The name on the body was embossed in the leather. 4 characters, a hyphen between them. No city of origin, no country of manufacture. On the SX-70, those details were not the point. The point was the photograph in your hand, 60 seconds after the moment had passed, already permanent, already yours. No American camera had ever promised that. No American camera had ever delivered it. In the summer of 1973, Andy Warhol bought an SX-70. He did not buy it as a curiosity. He bought it as a working tool. Warhol had built his career on the reproducible image. The silk-screened portrait, the repeated frame, the industrial surface applied to human subjects. The SX-70 gave him something his silk-screen process could not, an image that was unique, unrepeatable, and physically immediate. He began carrying the SX-70 everywhere, to dinner parties in Manhattan, to his factory studio on Union Square, to celebrity sittings that he would have previously documented with a conventional 35mm camera. The SX-70 prints he made between 1973 and 1976, loose, intimate, slightly soft-focused images of the people and objects in his immediate world, were not publicity photographs. They were a private visual diary made possible by a camera that produced its result before the moment had fully ended. Warhol was not alone. Ansel Adams, the California landscape photographer whose black and white images of Yosemite and the American Southwest had defined a standard of technical precision in American photography for 30 years, served as a paid consultant to Polaroid from the early 1970s onward. Adams's consultancy was not decorative. He tested film emulsions, evaluated tonal ranges, and provided Polaroid's research division with the technical feedback of a photographer who understood the chemistry of the image at a level most camera users never reached. Adams shot with Polaroid's large-format instant film systems for professional evaluation, and his association with Polaroid, published in photography journals, discussed at camera club meetings, cited in popular photography, gave the company a credibility in the fine art photography community that no advertising budget could have purchased. Walker Evans, whose documentary photographs of Depression-era America for the Farm Security Administration remained among the most studied images in the history of American photography, spent the final years of his life shooting with an SX-70. Evans had spent 4 decades working with large-format view cameras and 35mm precision instruments. In 1973, at the age of 70, he adopted the SX-70 as his primary camera. The images he made in the last 2 years of his life, of roadside objects, weathered signs, the surfaces of American commercial culture, were made on SX-70 integral film, developed in his hand, examined immediately, and kept or discarded on the spot. Evans called the SX-70 the first camera that allowed him to think at the speed of seeing. These were not endorsement contracts. These were working photographers making working photographs. Inside American corporate culture, the SX-70 occupied a different but equally specific role. By 1974, the SX-70 had become the standard documentation tool for American insurance adjusters recording accident scenes, American real estate agents photographing property listings, and American contractors documenting construction progress at job sites. The photograph that arrived in 60 seconds and required no processing lab was not a luxury in these professional contexts. It was a logistical solution. State Farm Insurance, the largest American property and casualty insurer, incorporated instant Polaroid documentation into its standard claims adjustment procedures. The photograph was in the claims file before the adjuster left the site. The United States Department of Defense used Polaroid instant film for field identification photography, personnel records, equipment condition documentation, site security imagery, across multiple branches of the armed services throughout the 1970s. The Naval Photographic Center in Washington, D.C. evaluated and approved Polaroid SX-70 film for selected documentation applications in 1974. The camera that Edwin Land had designed for the American Family Snapshot had become, without revision or redesign, essential infrastructure for American professional and institutional photography. By 1978, Polaroid Corporation reported annual revenue of $1.4 billion. The Cambridge, Massachusetts headquarters employed more than 16,000 people across research, manufacturing, and distribution operations. The Waltham film manufacturing facility ran 3 shifts, 7 days a week. The New Bedford, Massachusetts plant produced the flat battery units built into every SX-70 film pack, a component so specialized that Polaroid had to invent the manufacturing process for it from scratch, because no battery technology of that scale and geometry had existed before the SX-70 required it. That battery detail is not a footnote. It is the measure of what Polaroid had built. To make the SX-70 work, Polaroid did not adapt existing technology. It invented new categories of American manufacturing: flat battery production, aspheric lens fabrication, integral film chemistry, motorized film ejection mechanisms small enough to fit inside a folding camera body. Each of those manufacturing capabilities required its own engineering division, its own supplier relationships, its own quality control protocols. The SX-70 was not a camera that Polaroid designed and then found vendors to produce. The SX-70 was a camera that required Polaroid to become simultaneously a battery company, an optics company, a precision motor company, and a photochemistry company, all operating under one roof in eastern Massachusetts. Edwin Land called it the most complex consumer product ever manufactured in the United States. He was not speaking hyperbolically. He was describing a bill of materials. The sensory experience of the SX-70 in use was unlike any other camera made in America before or since. The body was covered in genuine leather. Not vinyl, not leatherette, but tan or red leather bonded to a brushed chrome-finished aluminum frame. The camera unfolded in a single motion, the lens rising on a scissor mechanism into shooting position with a precision that felt engineered rather than assembled. The viewfinder was bright, clear, and showed exactly what the lens would capture. The shutter button required almost no pressure, a touch, not a press, and then the film unit emerged. It came out of the front of the camera with a soft mechanical whir, the sound of the motor driving the film through the rollers, and landed in the photographer's free hand or fell onto a table, already developing. The surface was opaque gray-green in the first seconds. Then, slowly, from the edges inward, color began to appear. Not all at once, in gradations. The shadows resolved first, then the midtones, then finally, the highlights settled into their final values. The full image took between 60 and 90 seconds to stabilize, depending on temperature. In cold weather, photographers tucked the developing print under an arm to keep it warm. In bright sun, they shaded it with their hand. Everyone who used an SX-70 remembers the smell. It was not the sharp ammonia bite of darkroom fixer or the chemical edge of photographic developer. It was something closer to warm plastic and sweet chemistry. Faint, specific, immediately recognizable to anyone who had ever held a developing Polaroid print. The smell meant the image was coming. It meant 60 seconds of waiting that felt, every single time, like anticipation rather than delay. That was Edwin Land's actual achievement, not the aspheric lens, not the flat battery, not the folding SLR mechanism that had required 7 years and $500 million to engineer. The achievement was that he made waiting feel like wonder. By 1977, Polaroid had sold approximately 5 million SX-70 cameras in the United States. The camera had appeared on the cover of Life magazine. It had been reviewed in publications that had never previously covered photographic equipment, architectural journals, design magazines, corporate communications trade publications. The SX-70 was not being discussed as a camera. It was being discussed as an object. But 1977 was also the year Polaroid introduced the one-step, and the one-step changed everything. The one-step was not the better camera than the SX-70. It was a cheaper one. That was the point. Polaroid's market research in the mid-1970s had identified a ceiling the SX-70 could not break through. At $180 retail, later reduced to $150, then $100 as manufacturing efficiencies accumulated, the SX-70 remained a purchase that required deliberation. American families who wanted instant photographs could want the SX-70 and still not buy it. The camera was aspirational in the precise economic sense, visible, desirable, and just beyond the budget of the household that most needed what it offered. The one-step, introduced in 1977 at $39.95, approximately $200 in today's dollars, used the same SX-70 integral film format as its more expensive sibling. It was a fixed-focus, fixed-exposure plastic camera with no folding mechanism, no through-the-lens viewfinder, and no manual controls of any description. It was, by every technical measure, an inferior instrument. It was also the best-selling camera in the world for 3 consecutive years. 10 million one-step units sold in 36 months. The one-step put instant photography into American households that had watched SX-70 owners at family gatherings and wanted what they had, the 60-second print, the image in the hand, without the price that had kept them from it. The one-step delivered the promise. It delivered it in orange plastic with a rainbow stripe. What the one-step also delivered, without anyone at Polaroid fully accounting for it at the time, was the redefinition of what a Polaroid camera was. Before 1977, a Polaroid camera was the SX-70, a precision instrument, a design object, a camera that serious photographers and corporate users carried because it did something no other camera could do with comparable quality. After 1977, a Polaroid camera was the one-step, disposable in feeling if not in fact, associated with casual snapshots rather than considered photography, a product whose primary virtue was its price. The SX-70 did not disappear. Polaroid continued to manufacture and refine it through the early 1980s, introducing the SX-70 sonar, the first consumer camera in American history with automatic ultrasonic autofocus, a system that sent an inaudible sound pulse toward the subject and measured the return time to calculate focus distance with no photographer input required. The sonar autofocus system, introduced in 1978, was a genuine engineering achievement. It was also, in retrospect, the last significant technical advance the SX-70 platform would receive. Because in 1976, before the one-step had reshaped the instant camera market from within, a different threat had arrived from outside. The Eastman Kodak Company, Rochester, New York, Polaroid's neighbor in the geography of American photographic manufacturing, its oldest rival in the consumer film market, introduced its own instant camera line. The Kodak EK4 and EK6 used a different film format, a different chemical process, and a different physical mechanism than the Polaroid SX-70. Kodak's instant cameras were competently made. They were distributed through Kodak's existing dealer network, which covered every camera store, every drugstore photo counter, and every mass-market retailer in the United States. Polaroid filed suit for patent infringement within months of Kodak's market entry. The lawsuit would take 10 years to resolve, and its resolution would prove, in ways Polaroid could not yet see, to be the beginning of the end. In October 1985, after 9 years of litigation, Federal District Court Judge Raya Zobel ruled in Polaroid's favor on all 12 patent claims. Kodak had infringed. The instant camera category belonged to Polaroid by law. In January 1986, Kodak was ordered to cease all instant camera production and sales immediately. The $925 million damages settlement arrived in 1991. Polaroid had won the largest patent victory in American photographic history. It had also spent a decade fighting a lawsuit instead of building a digital strategy. The engineers at Polaroid were not unaware of what was coming. Internal research documents from the mid-1980s show that Polaroid's technical staff had identified the charge-coupled device, the CCD sensor that converts light into digital data without requiring film of any kind, as an existential threat to film-based instant photography as early as 1983. The question was not whether digital imaging would displace film. The question was when, and whether Polaroid could build a business on the other side of that displacement. The answer Polaroid's management arrived at was the PDC-2000. Introduced in 1996, the PDC-2000 was a digital camera priced at $3,000, approximately $5, $80, $100 in today's dollars, aimed at professional photographers who needed to transmit images electronically without a film processing step. It was a technically capable instrument. It sold poorly. The professional market it targeted was already being served by Kodak's DCS series digital cameras and by Nikon and Canon digital backs. Polaroid had entered the digital camera market a decade after the technology had matured, and 5 years after its primary competitors had established distribution relationships with the professional buyers Polaroid needed. The PDC-2000 was not a rescue, it was a gesture. Meanwhile, the consumer market that had sustained Polaroid's film revenue through the one-step's decade of dominance was evaporating. Consumer digital cameras from Casio, Olympus, and Sony entered American retail distribution between 1995 and 1998 at price points that fell from $800 to under $400 in less than 3 years. Each digital camera sold was a film pack that would never be purchased. Each memory card that replaced a Polaroid film cartridge was a margin point removed from Polaroid's revenue model permanently. The numbers collapsed with the speed that Land's engineers had once applied to chemistry. 1998, Polaroid reports its first annual loss in a decade. 1999, the company takes on $300 million in additional debt. 2000, annual revenue falls below $1 billion for the first time since 1978. 2001, Polaroid files. Chapter 11, Bankruptcy, October 12th. The Cambridge headquarters, the Waltham film plant, the New Bedford battery facility, the 16,000 jobs. The $500 million in SX-70 development costs that had produced the most sophisticated consumer camera ever built in America. The patents that had defeated Kodak in federal court, all of it, subject to creditor claims, asset liquidation, and the judgment of a bankruptcy trustee. The SX-70 cameras that American families still owned continued to work. The film packs that fed them were disappearing from store shelves. Within 2 years of the bankruptcy filing, Polaroid integral film, the SX-70 format, the 600 format, the Spectra format, was either discontinued or available only through liquidation channels at prices that reflected scarcity rather than value. 16 million SX-70 cameras, no film. The most beautiful camera America ever built had outlasted the company that made it. It had not outlasted the world that made it necessary. The Polaroid brand name was sold at bankruptcy auction in 2002 to a holding company called Primary Wave Entertainment, which had no manufacturing capability and no intention of building one. The name was licensed to a succession of consumer electronics importers who applied it to flat-screen televisions, portable speakers, and disposable cameras manufactured in Asia. None of these products had any connection to Cambridge, Massachusetts, or to the chemistry Edwin Land had spent 30 years perfecting. The name survived, the company did not. The SX-70 cameras, however, did not stop working. Across the United States, in attic boxes and camera bags, and the back shelves of antique stores from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, SX-70 bodies in working condition continued to function exactly as they had been designed to function in 1972. The folding mechanism still operated, the shutter still fired, the motor still turned. The camera required only 2 things it could no longer easily obtain: a functioning battery and a film pack. The battery was built into the film pack. Without film, the camera was a precisely engineered object with nowhere to go. In 2008, a former Polaroid executive named Florian Kaps and a small group of European entrepreneurs identified the last remaining Polaroid integral film manufacturing facility in the world, a factory in Enschede in the eastern Netherlands that Polaroid had been preparing to close and dismantle. Kaps and his partners purchased the factory, retained the technicians who still understood the chemistry, and began the process of restarting SX-70 compatible film production from a standing start. They called the project the Impossible Project, named for what every industry contact had told them the undertaking was. The first rolls of Impossible Project film for SX-70 cameras reached American camera stores in 2010. The chemistry was not identical to Polaroid's original formulation. The original chemical specifications were proprietary, and key ingredient suppliers no longer existed. The early Impossible film was sensitive to light during development, produced colors that shifted unpredictably, and required the photographer to shield the ejected print from ambient light for the first 30 seconds. It was, by the standards of the original SX-70 system, imperfect. It sold immediately, and it kept selling. By 2017, the Impossible Project had rebranded as Polaroid Originals, acquiring the rights to use the Polaroid name for instant film and cameras. The Enschede factory was producing SX-70 compatible film in quantities sufficient to supply a global market of collectors, artists, and photographers who had either kept their original cameras or purchased them through the secondary market. On any given day in 2024, a working Polaroid SX-70 in good condition sells on eBay for between $80 and $250. Depending on model variant and cosmetic condition. The SX-70 Sonar, the autofocus version introduced in 1978, commands a consistent premium. Film packs for the SX-70 format retail for approximately $20.22 for 8 exposures, manufactured in the Netherlands, for a camera designed in Cambridge, Massachusetts more than 50 years ago. The surprise is not that people still use the SX-70. The surprise is what those people have discovered about it. Modern teardowns of the SX-70 mechanism, conducted by camera repair technicians and documented in detail on YouTube channels and photographic forums, consistently find manufacturing tolerances that current precision CNC machining processes cannot measurably improve upon. the folding mechanism, the mirror alignment, the lens positioning geometry. All of it was built to specifications in 1972 that remain, by the measurements available to 21st-century instrument makers, correct. The camera that Edwin Land said would cost whatever it cost to build correctly was built correctly. The market could not sustain it. The engineering has outlasted the market by half a century and is not finished yet. In a display case at the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, New York, the world's oldest photography museum, 4 hours by road from the Cambridge laboratory where Edwin Land first described absolute one-step photography to his shareholders in 1972, there's a Polaroid SX-70 in original tan leather and brushed chrome. The museum placard identifies it as an object of American industrial design. Not American photographic history, American industrial design. Edwin Land would have accepted that distinction. He had always understood that the camera was secondary. The photograph was the point. The 60 seconds were the product. The wonder was the thing he sold. Both are gone now. The wonder remains.